Hi, my name is Maisie, and for the first 28 years of my life, I was transgender, female to male. I grew up as a boy into a man. This is what I was used to, so in some ways it felt normal. Then this year, 6 months ago, I started to detransition, and I now live as a woman for the first time in my life. I've been thrown into a whirlwind of some pretty volatile and disorienting events and experiences, some of which goes back to March 5th this year, 2023. This was where I had the most intense and radical spiritual transformation of my life. It wasn't my first spiritual experience, but it was definitely the most intense. I went into a completely different realm, internally, inside my own body. That's how I traveled. And it was very energetic, it was very present, it was very infinite, this space I was in, and I connected to the fundamental force of creation of this universe. And in that experience, I was completely broken down and restructured. My ego structure, like this energetic, physical, geometric structure throughout my body, buried deep in me, was shattered and completely restructured and rebuilt. I was healed in a way that I never would have been able to imagine, that I had no familiarity with, I had no idea of, that I also never would have chosen when I was a trans man. The idea of detransitioning and being a woman would have been horrifying to me. It would have been horrifying and disgusting and deeply unsettling. I had no experiences being a woman. I had no experiences being at peace and whole and complete and free of pain, at rest in my body. 6 months ago, well, I suppose between 7 and 8 months ago is when this started to change. Now, I wanted to speak about some of these experiences today and connect them to the bigger picture, connect them to things that other people may experience. We're in this pretty radical upheaval, this wild, confusing, transformative paradigm shift. Some people would even call it the Metacrisis, depending on how you look at it. It could be all of these things. And I wanted to talk about things that I don't really see other people talking about quite this way. It's difficult to find these perspectives. And I don't even know how to characterize my perspective yet, as my worldview has been changing the last 3 years. So, one thing that I've noticed is when you're thrown into a tornado, your values and your priorities, your needs and your wants and desires, they all get thrown into the tornado with you, and it gets really scrambled up. And then you're kind of just left grasping for anything that anchors you to some solid ground. A lot of people seem kind of stunned and lost, and a lot of the things we do day to day just don't seem very important or effective. They're not really changing our lives in the ways that we need to and want to. And then there is a struggle to even identify how we should live. So I think there's a lot of questioning going on now. And I could use my experiences as a starting point to explore some of these questions. So if you're in the tornado, it's hard enough to find anything to grab onto. It's even harder to, say, structure a hierarchy of values and priorities. What's most important? What's second most important? What is everything else based on? What are the root things I always come back to that give me clarity, that can give me a worldview that's meaningful and enlivening and useful and practical and sanity restoring? These are the things that I'm really digging for right now. And I would say that since detransition, I keep coming back to three themes. That's nature, health, and spirituality. First of all, health is wealth. And I think materialism is covering this up and devaluing it. That people are running on junk food and entertainment and distractions at a high quantity and low quality. And it's making them numb and dissociated where they don't even really value the things that are really important because they don't ever go through minor periods of deprivation where they would then appreciate these things, where they would then put in the hard work and exercise and like literally physical exercise that makes your body feel better, where you then satiate yourself with healthy food and water. If you get used to that process, it can feel amazing. Challenging yourself and doing some physical full body movement that you really focus on and you're present with and you enjoy and you sink into the present moment with it. And maybe you're integrated in nature with it. You're barefoot, hands and knees in the dirt by, a moving river or a lake with birds and the trees and life. And a lot of people don't get these things. And then even when people do get these things, it's often not really noticed. It's in the background. I have always valued health very highly, more than I even realized for a while consciously until I became self-aware to different levels. And I've valued this because my health was really bad when I was a kid. I had terrible health issues. I remember some of my earliest memories. I was in severe pain and I was terrified and I thought I was going to die. Part of this was transgenderism, and this is what you don't hear from a lot of the mainstream groups that are kind of the loudest groups. Either the queer brigade of LGBT social justice people who think they are the champions and crusaders of transgender people. They don't ever talk about how it's this horrible medical disorder, that people with this disorder suffer deeply, and that's why we need some kind of treatment. And then people who are more skeptical or against transgenderism, often they don't even treat it like a mental illness anymore. They treat it like it's criminal behavior, like they've taken it to a whole other level. Would you be for or against a medical condition? See, this is what I mean when I say that the way this whole thing is structured doesn't really make sense. I've always cared about my health because I suffered when I was a kid. I was in pain a lot. Some of my earliest memories, as young as 4 years old, I thought I was going to die. I was terrified. Now, when I listen to people who are against transgenderism, who are outsiders, who seem to not be experienced with it, they don't really understand it, sometimes they talk as if people like me, who are transgender, are against truth, against reality. We just live in fantasy and in denial. But this is fundamentally opposite my experience. To better understand all of this, we need to talk about authenticity. I've been listening to Dr. Gabor Mate a lot on authenticity, why it's important, why it's a fundamental human need. And his definition, I'll paraphrase my own understanding, is that authenticity is our connection to our own gut instincts, our intuition, these driving forces and desires and human needs that are coming from within, that every person begins to move in the world when they're very young. They start walking, they start laughing, they start speaking. They move in the world in a unique way. They animate their body with their own conscious life force. There's something driving this. There's something inside of it that defines authenticity, being who and how you are. When I was a kid, I didn't know I was being raised as a girl for a long time. I only started to really figure it out by the time I was about 8 years old. It took quite a few years, and there was a lot of confusion and a lot of suffering and pain. So on one hand, I had all of these health problems and this terror that was very traumatizing, that was being ignored completely as if it didn't exist. and my issues were actually denied. So I was severely neglected, and hence why I care about my health so much. And then, on the other hand, simultaneously, I was being treated differently than other boys, and I was otherized. And I was only a kid, but I was already emasculated. I felt like I was being treated as a clown. So, the reality is, I was having an authentic experience that was different from what people thought I was having. And a lot of adults tend to project and force things onto kids. They make assumptions. They don't really pay attention and listen. They're not very present with their kids. Kids are not taken seriously. And this is really unfortunate. They should be treated as human beings. They may not speak, articulately with all of the right words in the right way, with a very in-depth adult understanding of the world. They're very playful, they're curious, creative, they can be goofy, so this can seem unserious, but we should take this seriously as something very precious, that this is not a one-way street where the adults know everything a certain way, it is the right way, and we put it on our kids. This should be a two-way street, because kids are where a lot of innovation and openness comes from, where the unknown can be really felt and explored. Dr. Gabor Mate explains that if you cannot express your authenticity safely, if your parents will reject it, a lot of people suppress their authenticity. They self-censor. They suppress it in their bodies, like you can tense up and hold your breath. So now you are in conflict with your body and you are struggling. Now, in my case, I think my transgenderism protected me from this. I was a kid that tended to externalize, and I was extremely rebellious. I was extremely independent. I remember from as young as 5 to 6 years old, I was fantasizing about escaping my family's house and being independent. And I think my transgenderism had an impact on this. It was so devastating to me that a very serious health condition was being denied. I didn't have advanced fancy language to describe and understand this stuff. I just had that gut instinct, that authentic, deep knowing of my nature, my health, nature, and maybe even spirituality. Beyond, fully understanding any of this to any depth, I just was driven by that instinct and I responded to it. I had certain behavior. I was very masculine. I was very boyish, and that's how I experienced the world. Now, when adults would try to suppress this in me and reject it, it wasn't successful in actually getting rid of it and magically making me act more like a girl and perceive myself as a girl. Ignoring the problem did not make it go away. And I actually think at this point that suppression and denial of transgenderism plays a major fundamental role in defining and causing the condition, like long-term into teen years and adulthood, long-term transgenderism. Some of the research says that a large percentage of kids grow out of transgenderism, what some people call gender dysphoria, later in life, by their teen to adult years. So they heal in some deep way. That's my interpretation of it. They integrate in some deep way different parts of themselves. I call it healing mostly because transgenderism is suffering. It's painful. So I'm not for or against this condition. I had it for a very long time. And before I was healed, I would have never wanted to detransition or be healed this way, because it went against my authenticity, my deepest instincts. The other thing about authenticity here is that I had a whole collection of traits, like behavior and desires and natural instincts, that were very boyish, where I felt like a boy. So it's like this whole category that was labeled boy. And I saw myself in other boys. This was just natural. Much easier than trying to see myself in girls. That was not really natural. So what happens then if all of these authentic parts of yourself are repeatedly denied and rejected by people around you, by adults when you're a kid. Well, it felt like I was in the Matrix. And I couldn't necessarily put words to this for a long time. But it took me until I was at least 8 years old to even figure out that I was being raised as a girl. Like, it was around 8 years old, I remember having this realization that was almost incomprehensible to me, and it was shocking. That not only were people trying to force me to be a girl, but they actually believed I was a girl. The problem is that nobody sat me down and explained to me what was happening. Nobody said, we're going to try to make you a girl, or we believe you're a girl. Nobody said, you have this rare disorder and that's why you have all this pain. Nobody said anything. This was worse than rejection and suppression actively. This was the purest form of denial, where they acted as if everything was normal. And my issues were minimized and downplayed. And it was like I was living in this matrix where everything that was fundamental to what I was going through was being denied. What happens then is you have an internal world that develops with your authenticity, with truth, with things you have to deal with alone. And then you have an external world that develops where you interact with this external world and there's something that's being forced on you. So there is this massive separation between those two worlds that are very different from each other. I strongly believe at this point that anybody who rejects and suppresses transgenderism in their kids, or in kids in general, is reinforcing and deepening that disorder and is going to guarantee the pain and suffering of that person long term. I believe that part of healing, fundamental healing, is related to expression, authentic expression. And I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate is talking about how authenticity heals people. So we need to return to those gut instincts. We need to start feeling in our bodies again. So this is really the bigger picture. I imagine different people, and I've listened to different people who are on many different sides of this transgender war, and I question how many of them are deeply dissociated, how many of them have poor health and, maybe don't take care of their health. Or, if a person is critical of transgenderism and then says to someone like me, how I used to be when I was transgender, well, you're against reality, you're against truth, you're against health and spirituality. I might ask them, well, what are you doing for your health? When you're watching, all of these transgender detransition videos and you're talking about these things and you're so against it and so suppressing that you want it to be suppressed and rejected, are you spending time outside in nature? Are you planting and growing things? Are you building things with your hands and building useful skills? Are you pursuing meaningful things and really contemplating and sitting in silence and asking yourself what you really want? Do you know what your hero's journey is, what your mission is? Do you take care of your health? Are you out exercising? Are you feeling deeply in your body how good it feels when you actually get through some exercise? Like how much better you feel when you eat healthy food? Are you doing any of those things for your health, for your nature, for your spirituality? Or are you spending your time online, focused so much on a small group of people who are deeply suffering and in a lot of pain? I won't pretend to know exactly what transgenderism is, or that I really fully understand all of the things that have happened to me throughout my life. One thing that I know that hasn't changed about me is how I'm driven by authenticity. I don't even know if it would have been possible for me to heal the way I did and be transformed by the creator of the universe if I wasn't driven by authenticity and truth from inside. When I've been disconnected from these things, I'm like a leaf on the wind, a wanderer, a man in no man's land. What am I? I know these things are important for humanity, especially now. And I know that there are old activities, ideas, ways of being that do not hold their weight anymore, that aren't really very meaningful to a lot of people. And if we cling to old values, then we will not make space for evolution, flexibility, new growth, for new life. When I was 14 years old, I was at the peak of my pain and suffering. Transgenderism, everything being denied, being heavily controlled and abused, feeling powerless over my life, looking to the outside world, just imagining how remarkable it would be to be empowered, to be the creator in my own life and go out and do something. That's my own unique mission, my own unique thing that I could do that would be powerful, creative, that'd be the unknown, that'd be a leap into something on faith. That I would decide it was worth doing against the odds. I wanted that so much. And I was suffering my condition. I was suffering a lot. I remember one day, it was seemingly out of nowhere, this voice spoke to me from inside internally, like it was coming from in my body. It was kind of like when you hear your voice in your head, but it was not my voice. It was deep. It was infinite. It was powerful. It was almost intimidating, but it was like intimidating with love, this like loving, emanating nature that was just big, that was coming from nature. It was like I felt it, like it was embodying the wind and the immensity of the earth and just all of this stuff I could feel in the energy of this voice. And it came to me so casually, so just like that, here it is. And it said to me, if you do not do something about this, it's going to kill you. And I was brought to my knees with that because, among everything else, it was the first time anybody acknowledged my condition or my suffering. That it was acknowledged as real and as existing. I can't really ever put into words what it was like to experience the Matrix, to be alone in that. And I had to fight my way out of this deep story, this layers of years of story that was pushed onto me. I'm like, no, that's not what's happening to me. So, like, you could say transgenderism is a mental illness. You could say I'm wrong in some way about my disorder. Fine, whatever. I'm not really attached to that. That's not the main thing I care about. One of the big points here is that I was alone in trying to find truth and answers as a kid, as an abused kid, heavily controlled. I was suffocated. I just wanted a glimpse of touching the real world and being free and not being in pain anymore. I immediately started trying to look for answers. That voice, that experience ignited a fire inside of me, and I looked for answers, and I was going to save my life. In a lot of ways, it was one of the most meaningful, alive, liberated moments of my life, that period. It was painful, it was hard, but it was like rewarding at that point. The pain was almost rewarding. It was almost a source of my energy and meaning because I was so connected to something so much deeper than my life, than just myself. And I was in it. I was going to fight to save my life or die trying. And I did it. I freed myself. I moved out at 17. I started testosterone. I got medical help. I went through the gauntlet. And I guess the point of this video is really to call people to actually listen and pay attention. To actually listen and pay attention to what's happening to you and Give yourself enough silence and space, not doing things where instead of assuming it's going to be boring and there's not much that's going to happen, and it's like, all right, I'm just going to meditate, I guess, and that's good for me, I guess. Maybe you could sit down and you could ask yourself, as if you are a person you are getting to know for the first time. Maybe you don't know the depth of yourself and your being. You haven't experienced it yet. That you could ask yourself, what do I really want? And just wait and feel. And just let things arise. Let things arise. That authenticity that is spontaneous. Or maybe you don't know what's going to happen within you. Maybe you don't know all of the things you actually really want and need. You know, I look at what happened to me, and it did confront me with completely restructuring my worldview on transgenderism and who and what I was. I have asked myself if I was really a man, or how much of a man I was, how much of a woman I am now, if I really can be. What if maybe I was so good at passing as a man and feeling like a man that I really was, and so then how much of a woman could I really be now? I've looked at this from so many different angles of, questioning, what am I? What have I been? What is the deeper truth here that connects all of these things? And I'm still on that journey. I'm not as attached to certain things as I used to be. I used to really hate the label of transgenderism because it made it sound like a mental illness. It made it sound like you were changing your gender. And I'm like, hold up a second. I didn't ask anybody to treat me as a girl. I'm a boy. I didn't change my gender. People tried to force stuff on me. I used to be very attached to those things, and there were certain ways that I was locked down, and I was rigid, and very gradually, very slowly and painfully, I began to heal myself, and learn to cope with and live with this deep contradiction in my body, where like you can't escape your body. It's the only one you get in this life. And we should value that so much more. I would even say this as a message to transgender people, or people suffering from body dysmorphia, or maybe obesity, and you really suffer, feeling crappy and not looking the way you want to look, or maybe you have a horrible health condition, or you have cancer. When people are suffering their bodies, just doing what you can to do physical activities that help you feel okay, that give you some flexibility, to breathe deeper, to form some strength and tolerance, and just remind yourself that you will find those little moments of relief, those little moments of liberation and relaxation, that you won't always feel the same way. You won't always feel locked up. You will not always suffer forever. And there is meaning, and there is power, and there is beauty in what you are going through. And you can discover that meaning, that power, that beauty. That voice I heard when I was 14, I heard that voice again, March 5th, and even in the days after. It was so infinite and immense, awe-striking, full of this profound love. I do not say this because I am arrogant and I know everything. I say it because I am humbled, that I cannot perceive this as any other than the voice of God, the Creator. This force of creation that appears to us in many forms, so that we can experience it in different ways and get something from it. It communicates to us in ways that we need at that moment. So I don't have all these answers about everything that's happened to me. I've been humbled in a way that I used to think I finally found some answers about my condition, what was happening to me, that I was a man with a rare disorder that was tragic and could never really fully be healed. And this was not the end of the story. There is something that I've heard from the Creator, that sometimes it sounds like my own deepest voice internally, my deepest authenticity, and sometimes it sounds like the Creator, that we are in this connection. And this voice has been saying since my experience March 5th and detransition, it has been saying, after death, there is always new life. Hopefully I can be a beacon of light and add a moment of clarity for people. Thank you for everything. I have no complaints about anything. And remember, your presence is a gift.